So the first question to start this new sermon series is this one. Have you ever been amazed? Try to remember a situation that amazed you. This year, Julian and I, we had the privilege to visit the Grand Canyon for the first time. And I need to confess that when I came there for the first time and I saw, the first question in my mind was, is it real? I had to clean my glasses to see better and to, what's that? I never saw anything like the Grand Canyon. It was a different feeling, right? I am a very logical person, and I love to see the reasons for things, and I saw the layers there, and I know there are many different explanations, geological explanations for that place. But what I saw there was people being amazed. I didn't talk to anyone there, but I believe there were atheists, scientists, believers, non-believers, but everyone was amazed there. And I think that we should understand the place of amazement in our spiritual life. It's interesting that we are talking about devotion during this year. This is our theme for the year. We want to see a church devoted to God. And it's important to understand that true devotion requires more than intellectual conviction. We are not just looking for answers, to understand things, knowledge. This is very, very important, and you know that. But we are looking for something more than that. Have you had the experience of winning an argument and losing the person? As a couple, we have discussions, and sometimes this happens, right? We win the argument, but at the end, we lose the person. Because we need to understand that when we go to the Bible, we have more than just information about life. There is more in here. I can say that apologetics is not everything. There is something more. If the truth that we read and that we know is not provoking this kind of amazement in us, there won't be devotion. There will be knowledge. But we want devotion. We need to be amazed by this book, amazed by God. And this is the theme for our series now. I was reading the Gospels, and I was impressed how many times we are told that people in contact with Jesus are amazed. I have some examples here in the Gospel of Mark. All the people were amazed, Mark chapter 5. Many who heard him were amazed, Mark chapter 6. People were overwhelmed with amazement, Mark chapter 7. The disciples were even more amazed, Mark chapter 10. The whole crowd was amazed at his teaching, Mark chapter 11. You see that Jesus provoked more than just good impressions or, okay, this is okay. No. When Jesus spoke, people were amazed by him. If there's a text in the Bible that we need to revisit to understand who God is and who we are is Genesis chapter 1 to 3. These 3 chapters, they have a crucial importance in the Bible. Without this, we cannot understand the Bible. Darrell Johnson says that Genesis, the first chapters of Genesis, are the story that makes sense of our stories. Think about that. Without Genesis 1, 2, 3, we don't have information or answers to know who God is, who we are. We don't know why Jesus had to come to save us. It's interesting that Chris Watkins says that Genesis 1 to 3 is like the bottom row of a Jenga play. Have you played Jenga here? We have Jenga here, right? You know that, right? Imagine that this is the Bible. At the bottom, we have this Genesis 1, 2, 3. And you know what happens if I remove these 3 basic pieces here at the bottom, right? Let's do that. Okay. We cannot do that. It's destroyed. Because if we remove the base, the foundation, we cannot understand the meaning of the Bible. The Genesis 1 to 3 is a kind of foundation, a framework for the whole Bible. And when we read Genesis 1 to 3, we are amazed by God. We are amazed when we read the rest of the Bible based on what we know reading Genesis 1, 2, 3. I could say that without Genesis 1, 2, 3, we read the rest of the Bible without amazement. This is the framework of everything. And we'll start reading Genesis 1, 2, 3, starting with the first verse today. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. I believe that everyone knows this first verse of the Bible. Can you read with me? We have here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Think about that for a moment. It's a very small verse, but it contains one of the biggest, if not the biggest, truth about the universe. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's important to say here, before we start this series, that we must read the text. We must read the Bible on its own terms, not ours. It's important to understand that. Because many people start with the wrong questions when they read Genesis chapter 1. And when we start with the wrong questions, there's a high chance that we will jump to the wrong conclusions. If we start with the wrong questions, we jump to the wrong conclusions. Think with me that the first audience of Genesis knew nothing about Einstein. Knew nothing about Hawkins. They knew nothing about Darwin. They knew nothing about Galileo. They knew nothing about Copernicus. They were not trying to answer those scientists. We need to put the text within the context in order to understand. So let me be honest with you right now. Reading Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and 3, I won't go, or I won't try to answer some questions that we usually make in here. I won't try to bring our scientific cosmology to the text in here. I won't try to answer questions about a time frame of millions of years, if the earth is young or old, what about the dinosaurs? The dinosaurs, sorry. What about the days in Genesis? 24 hours, eras? No, I won't enter in this. And I won't do that for one reason. Because the first audience of Genesis, they didn't ask about that. They didn't understand the text with this in mind. So let's understand the terms of Genesis. Questions like, who wrote the text? Who was the text written to? In what circumstances was it written? For what purpose? How did the first audience understand it? So we need to understand those questions. When we interpret the Bible, every other text, if we are serious, we'll do the same questions. We'll make the same questions. So when we go to Genesis, we understand that this is part of the first 5 books of the Bible. It's a set, it's a collection. And the context for that, the Exodus, the Hebrew Exodus from Egypt, is the historical context for the first 5 books of the Bible, also known as Torah or Pentateuch. And you need to understand that for centuries of slavery in Egypt, the Hebrews had been indoctrinated in the Egyptian worldview. They were highly polytheists. And we will see that Genesis chapter 1 is not an answer to naturalism, but to polytheism. This doesn't mean that naturalism is right and that Genesis doesn't say anything about that. But in its original context, we need to see these people leaving Egypt with Moses after 400 years. And they were leaving Egypt led by Moses, and God was establishing his people. And I'd like to share with you some information here that maybe you never thought about that. But how was the world according to these people? I made some research here, and I found this diagram of their cosmology. Do you know that the Hebrews believed in a flat earth? Do you know that? For them, our planet was flat. And there was this kind of dome above. And this is called in the Bible firmament. And everything we can see, the sun and the moon and the stars, they are below this dome. Above this, there is water. And above the waters, God. And below the earth, there is this place called Sheol, the place of the death. And they believed that this flat world had a kind of foundations, the foundations of the earth, sustaining this huge disk called earth. This is the way that they believed. And you know what's the most interesting thing about that? Let me quote here John Walton. And he says, the Israelites received no revelation to update or modify their scientific understanding of the cosmos. They did not know that stars were suns. They did not know that the earth was spherical and moving through space. They did not know that the sun was much further away than the moon, or even further than the birds flying in the air. They believed that the sky was material, not vaporous, solid enough to support the residence of deity, as well as to hold back waters. In these ways and many others, they thought about the cosmos in much the same way that anyone in the ancient world thought, and not at all like anyone thinks today. And God did not think it important to revise their thinking on those matters. So, we don't have a kind of cosmology lecture in Genesis. We don't learn in here about geography, astronomy. We don't have this kind of information in here. The approach is not scientific, like we used to say. There is something more. It's important that you think about the Hebrews leaving Egypt after 400 years being indoctrinated there. So based on that, we need to make this basic question about Genesis. What did these words, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, what did those words mean to the Hebrews as they left Egypt for the promised land? What's the intention of this passage in the history of Revelation? We are tempted to read the text with all that we know about our solar system, about galaxies, about the way that we understand the world. But in fact, we need to go there and understand how they understood the world and what God was revealing to them. And then we will extract the lessons for us today. So this is why I won't enter in these questions that we used to hear from our kids. We can talk about that in another opportunity, but I won't enter in here about that, on this. So I bring here for you today, in this first message based on this first verse, 5 propositions that I believe is the intention of the text. 5 propositions. And after that, I'll bring it to you 3 implications for our lives based on this verse. So the first proposition is, there is only one true God. This is the first proposition about Genesis. In the beginning, God created the earth, and the heavens and the earth. Let me say, in Egypt, they believed that almost everything they could see was God. And these first chapters of Genesis It is about God. It is not essentially about creation. It is about God. Do you know that the word God appears in the first 4 chapters of Genesis 70 times, 70 times in 4 chapters? When you read this passage, the word that you see more times is God. Because this is a text about God, because the Egyptians told them that everything is God. The sun, God, Ha. The moon, the Nile, waters, Pharaoh, everything was a God. When Moses brings these people for the promised land, God is revealing himself as the only true God. It's interesting that in many myths of creation in the ancient world, the universe was formed as a kind of result of cosmic battles. So gods were fighting, and at the end, there is the universe as the result of this kind of cosmic battle among gods. And in here, the Hebrews are learning, no. Pay attention to that, Hebrews. There is only one God. God created the sun. The sun is not a God. The sun is a creation created by God. So you cannot worship the sun. You cannot worship the moon. You cannot worship the river because they are just creation, like you and me. There is just one true God. The world is not the result of this battle among gods because there is just one God. Genesis 1 is different from the ancient narratives. There is no one God to be in conflict with, no evil to play the antagonist in his grand creation plan. Genesis 1 is different. It's not a war among gods. Genesis 1 is calm and ordered. No one gets hurt. No one dies. The universe is not created in war and through fighting, but in peace and through speaking. God says, and things happen. So the Hebrews were understanding that there is just one true God. Chris Watkins says, God is the sole, unique, and absolute cause of all that exists. The universe depends on God for its existence, but God does not depend on the universe for his. When we read that, we are amazed by this God. There are no rivals. There is just one God. This is the first proposition. The second proposition says, God is prior and distinct from the world he created. That says, in the beginning, before there was a beginning to the universe, there was a God beyond the universe. We need to understand that. The Hebrews needed to understand that. What they could see was not eternal. God is eternal. God is prior, everything. So God is not the Son is not God. In the book of Revelation, we read, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." He was there. We are not eternals. God is eternal. All of us. And we can say that the fundamental distinction in our universe is not between God and devil. Two eternal things. No. This is not the fundamental distinction in the universe. Or between one part of creation and another. No. The fundamental distinction is between God and everything else. Although God created everything, He is not everything. And for many ancient narratives of creation, the gods became the universe. But in the Hebrew perspective, it is different. So we should not see anything as eternal in the universe because God is prior. This is the second proposition. The third proposition says that God didn't need to create the universe. Think about that. God didn't need to create the universe. It's not the case that God was there and at some point in eternity, He became bored. Oh, I'm so bored. I have nothing to do. I'm alone here. So I need something to fulfill me. No, it's not the case. It's not the case. The universe is not necessary. God is necessary. So we have this beautiful quote from Paul Williams. He says, in most of ancient cosmologies, humanity was created as an afterthought to supply the gods with food, but in Genesis account, humanity is the pinnacle of creation, and God supplies a whole garden of food for them. Genesis deliberately counters the idea that human beings exist to meet God's needs and instead presents God as meeting human needs. Some examples of these needs: purposeful work, a place to live, food to eat, companionship and community, and after fall, post-fall, clothes to wear. So, think about that. If you are here today, if a universe exists, this is by God's grace. We used to understand that grace comes to our world after the fall. So there is a redemption. No. The simple act of creating the universe is an act of grace. Let's understand that. I have this other quote here. God did not create because He had to. God did not make the universe to satisfy something that was incomplete in Him. He does not need the universe in order to be who He is. And He does not need us in order to be fulfilled. Let me be honest with you. God doesn't need you. He doesn't need me. Right? He didn't create the universe because He was bored or because He said, oh no, I need something to supply for me. No. He is the provider. He supplies. In Egypt, they understood in the other way around. People in Egypt, the slaves, the Hebrews, they had to work hard every day to provide for gods, the Pharaoh. They had to work to provide food, to provide everything, security for the gods of Egypt. And in here, Moses brings this revelation from God, saying, hey, our God is different. We don't provide to God. God provides to us. So it's important to understand that God didn't need to create the universe. It's an act of grace. So let's be thankful. I'll talk about that in a moment. Proposition number 4. Do you remember the propositions? Of course not. So I'll repeat that so you cannot forget. Number 1, there is only one true God. Number 2, God is prior and distinct from the world He created. Number 3, God didn't need to create the universe. Number 4, there are purpose and intentionality in the universe. The Hebrews needed to understand that the universe, the cosmos, and the reality, it was not a kind of side effect of a war among gods. Okay, they were in war, fighting among each other, and then it happened to exist, the universe. No, it's not the case. God had a plan in eternity, and He created everything with purpose and intentionality. We are not an accident. You see that this was something very, very meaningful for the Hebrews. And for us today, it is meaningful for different reasons. Because after many, many years, some people says that we are a kind of cosmic accident. So let me say something. In Genesis and in the Bible, there is no such a thing as luck, chance, fate. When you read Genesis and when we read the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Bible as a whole, God is governing the history. Nothing happens without this supervision. So there is a purpose in everything. Even when bad things happen, we read, for example, in Exodus chapter 9, that Moses came to the Pharaoh saying on God's behalf, Exodus chapter 9, for this purpose I have raised you up, Pharaoh, to show you my power, so that my name be proclaimed in all the earth. So, Pharaoh, you have authority, but I gave you this authority. You think you are the God of this land. You are not. It's interesting that when we read the book of Exodus, the 10 plagues, or wonders like we used to read in the Bible, we read this was a kind of God defeating all gods of Egypt. Exodus chapter 12, it says that. God was showing them, hey, you are not gods like you think. And I will show you. There is purpose and intentionality. When we lose that perspective, we fell in a deep existential depression or anxiety. I have this guy to show to you. You know this guy, Jean-Paul Sartre. And he wrote a book called Nausea. And he says something that is the result of understanding our world without God. He says, it was true. I had always realized I hadn't any right to exist at all. I had appeared by chance. I existed like a stone, a plant, a microbe. I could feel nothing to myself but an inconsequential buzzing. I was thinking that here we are eating and drinking to preserve our precious existence, and that there is nothing, absolutely no reason for existing. Think about someone with this mindset. So sad, right? There is no reason for existence. If you think that you are a kind of cosmic accident, the result of millions and millions and millions of years of just kind of evolution without any kind of supervision, so here we are, like Jean-Paul Sartre. But we believe that there is a reason, there is a purpose. Many people say, hey, each one needs to define his or her purpose in life. Based on the Bible, we don't define our purpose. We find our purpose. There's a difference between, okay, you make your story, you define the purpose of your life. No. Based on the Bible, we need to find that purpose. The purpose is prior to the person. It's important to understand that this is in here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So the last proposition, and then we go to finish with the three implications. The last proposition is that if God created the heavens and the earth, the logical implication is that the universe belongs to God. Think about that. The universe belongs to God. We read this in many different passages of the Bible. I'll give you just two. Deuteronomy, chapter 10. Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, and the earth with all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers to choose their offspring after them, you above all peoples as you are this day. So, everything belongs to the Lord. And when he chooses someone, it's not because of something special to offer to him. We already belong to him. Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. It's important. Okay, everything belongs to the Lord, but let's bring this to us, okay? Your family, your spouse, your kids, your house, your car, your trailer, your job, your life. None of this belongs to you. Think about that. Everything belongs to the Lord. And the same God that gave can take without asking your permission. So let's be thankful and let's not take for granted everything we have, because they are not ours. Everything belongs to the Lord. Every authority comes from the Lord. If everything belongs to the Lord, you don't have final authority. All human authority is delegated by God. You don't have final authority with your kids. You cannot do whatever you want with your kids, or with your wife, or with your husband, because you represent God. Your authority is delegated by God. So the universe belongs to God. And I can say I'm very happy with that, because I could not handle to own the universe, right? It's a great relief that it's not mine responsibility to keep the universe. So relax. You don't need to save the world, to keep the world. The world doesn't depend on you. What are the implications? I have just 5 minutes for that, and I'll bring you 3 implications that come from these propositions, from this first verse. Number 1, we have an inward attitude. What's that? Humbleness. This is about it calls us, the doctrine of creation, calls us to humbleness, to understand that we are just creation, we are not gods. This beautiful quote from Tripp says, the first 4 words of the Bible, in the beginning, God, puts us in our place. We didn't start things. We don't control them. The world doesn't function according to our plans. We don't know what's coming next. And we wouldn't know who we are and what we are supposed to be doing if it were not for the Creator. We will never be in the center of it all. Every part of our creaturehood is defined by limits. We have limits of wisdom and understanding, limits of strength and ability, and physical and spiritual limits of every kind. We are weak creatures. We need to be humble before God. This is a kind of inward attitude. When we read Genesis chapter 1, there is no space for pride. Let's understand who we are. We depend on God. You are breathing now, right? I hope everyone here is breathing. Please, Lord, everyone needs to breathe, right? This is grace. God is giving you this capacity right now. Humbleness. The second attitude is an outward attitude. Stewardship. It's important to understand that this is based on Genesis 1, chapter 1. We are stewards. We are not owners. And there is a difference, a crucial difference. If everything belongs to the Lord, we must not see ourselves as owners, but stewards of God's grace. Like Peter says, 1 Peter chapter 4. God is the owner. He can give and take away. God is the owner. All human authority is ambassadorial. God is the owner. We are accountable to Him. So, we need to understand that. We don't possess people. We don't possess things. We are stewards. And the question is, how have we been taking care of what God entrusted to us? It's a great question. Stewardship. We need to understand that, because according to the Apostle Paul in Romans, each of us account to himself, of himself to God. Each one of us. because we are stewards. We'll talk more about that in the next, I will specify this kind of stewardship in the next sermons. And the third implication, it's an upward attitude. You see, an inward attitude, humbleness, outward attitude, stewardship, and an upward attitude of worship. Only God must be worshipped. And this is not a cliche, right? I'm not talking something or preaching to the choir here. No. This is something that we should think about. I love how Chris Watkins brings two different diagrams. And these two diagrams represent the way that we understand our relationship to God. For many people, there is this N-shaped dynamic. N-shaped dynamic. You know, N. It starts in here. Okay? Nobody starts there with N. We start below, at the bottom. I make a sacrifice to God. Then God gives me what I want. N-shaped dynamic. Many people want to have this kind of relationship to God. Okay, I'll make my sacrifice, and God, you need to bless me. Okay, you answer me, God. I'll give you what you want, so you give me what I want. This is the way that the Egyptians thought. But what we read in Genesis is a different perspective. It's not N-shaped. It is the U-shaped. When you write the U, you start on the top, okay? First, God reaches down in unmerited grace. God creates everything. God creates you. God is merciful on you. Comes every blessing, flows from our God the Father. And then we respond in joyful and obedient thanks. Are you able to see the difference between the N shape and the U shape? And my question is, how do you relate to God based on this N relationship or the U relationship? God provides, and everything that I do with my life is a kind of response of gratitude to God, because we are focused on God, not the creation. So these are the three lessons, and I will talk more about that in the next sermons. But for today, I hope you will stay with these three lessons from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Humbleness, stewardship, and worship. This is a life that understands, a life that is amazed, a devoted life to God based on Genesis chapter 1. God is above all. God is the center, not me.